Yeah, that's working well. Thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, so we've just been asked to present on current market position and where we see the market at the moment and interventions within that market to work with it. Start off just with a little bit of a blurb about RCP. So RCP, New Zealand's leading provider of independent project management and strategic advisory services to the property and construction industry. Sorry, get that sink in there. Yeah, with more than 25 years experience delivering many of the country's prominent and award-winning property developments and a track record in both the private and public sector, with approximately 190 people across the country, with offices up and down the country, and sort of 32 at the moment in Wellington, and we're continuing to grow. And just a little blurb on myself. So I'm a senior project manager here at RCP in Wellington, predominantly working on commercial developments and redevelopments across the city. Just as a start up with a bit of an industry snapshot, where we see the market at the moment, what's up, what's down, where things are likely to be heading. So it'll be this. Oh, that's not right. That's there we go. So what's going up? So we see public works, both central and local, coming forward, taking more of a prominent view. Social infrastructure and health continue to grow, increased investment in those areas, which is great. Housing, residential is still ongoing, and we'll see that continuing to grow. Aged care developments, pretty large piece of the market now, and that will continue, especially with an ageing population. Mixed use becoming more common, and industrial as well. And then what's going the other way? Commercial offices been very big for the last 5 to 10 years. That will start to ease off, along with the retail impacts of COVID over the last years will start to hurt, and we see that as sort of making a bit of a back step. Hospitality and tourism, the same there, although that may change with opening of market, the country, and tertiary education. I mean, those last three are really impacted by the world events at the moment. And what's disrupting the market? So supply chain disruptions, that's pretty big at the moment. Peak disruption in pricing, we see still to come in this year, possibly through to 2023. There's a greater need for clients and contractors to bulk order greater off-site storage options just to meet programs. It's really quite difficult out there for contractors. That's pushing warehousing options, the nearing capacity, and the ability to increase facilities. There's a lead time on that, so that's really starting to impact and being noticed. We're seeing, got a picture up there of current ships out there on the ocean. Shipping delays really starting to, or have been over the last 12 months, having a big impact. There's been a 30 to 50% less voyages on some of these routes. Something I haven't ever done in the past, but tracking ships now, getting names of ships, bringing products to New Zealand and actually monitoring and seeing where they go. So it's a new string to the bow, and my subscription to marine traffic probably needs to be renewed, but that's well used. Seen a 30% drop in shipping from Asia to New Zealand, was weekly, and you know that's really going down. Shipping from West Coast from USA to New Zealand was once a week. Now is sort of we're seeing circa 75% drop in the number of ships coming from the US to New Zealand. In China, as initial shipping issues are there, and the ports massive backlogs there, and that has knock-on effects to the industry and globally. And then additional, we're seeing geopolitical stress between Australia and China. Raw materials and the lack of Australian coal going through to China will start to flow through to the rest of the market. And just having a look at what we're seeing in sort of more, I guess, locally through design and construction and the disruption happening there. There is a limited access to high quality contractors. Their books are full. Wellington's really as a small market and limited good contractors, so that's hurting the ability to get projects underway. And same with consultant teams. Again, small market, limited number of players, having to look further afield, but that comes with difficulties. There are limited skilled resources across the industry, and that's impacting profitability and cost. The linear design process that we're all used to and has been in action for a very long time is not. I'll talk to this a little bit further on, but that does delay projects now, given the way that it's working, and particularly around the need for procurement and considering that much earlier in the project, and those approval processes that need to take place during, with that standard linear design process. It needs to be rethought, and it does impact on early procurement and consenting requirements through that council are now requiring. Programs are becoming heavily tagged by contractors around material supply. Are very nervous to fix anything. Passing that risk through to clients, and there's an uncertainty in the market around costs and funding and approval. They're all real. It's all happening. As I noted, the contractors have a reluctance to fix pricing. Tenders are heavily tagged around escalation and exchange rate. I think lawyers probably making a fair bit of money on just working that through in contracts to protect both clients and contractors on both sides. And we're in a boom and right now, and that is a funny thing, but that's a risk to main and some contractors going under. We've seen a little bit of that, not a huge deal at the moment, but it is a real risk that sits there at the moment, and we do need to be aware of. So just some notes around intervention. The projects coming on board and what we're needing to do and where we're needing to go with this right at the beginning around the feasibility and business planning. Need really clear briefs and a review of the whole delivery model, not just design. It needs to be from considering what we want to do right through to when that needs to be delivered. That whole process needs to be really clearly mapped out from the beginning. And I mean, it goes without saying, but there needs to be a robust development and construction budget. And that needs to be really considered early and set in place. And if these projects are going to meet timeframes that a lot of clients are wanting to still maintain. Program and market. Program and market resourcing needs to be tested early to ensure that what we think we can do, we can actually do. So it's sort of something that we can't be left for the end of the design period. So it needs to be thought about right at the beginning, and that leads on to design. And early engagement with contractors, getting ECIs in place and understanding what they mean and what they do, and the terms around that. It's one thing to have a contractor on board, but they need to add value as well. But it is something that we're finding is the best approach at the moment. But also critical sub-trades, because as I'll throw up in the next slide, there is a need to engage with them quite early in that design process in order to hit timeframes that we're looking to get. Commercial terms need to be negotiated early. That sort of flows into the ECI, locking it in some pricing just around margins and preliminary generals, so that clients are covered there. Open negotiations on risk allocation. It's more attractive. It helps to keep contractors. It requires a lot of collaboration and a lot of trust, but it's what's required to keep us on track. Goes without saying as well, quality documentation relevant to the delivery strategy when we're getting design and what that design looks like, and is it sufficient to get a real locked-in price early to hit, we're going to not have a whole lot of design changes later on, or need to revisit or go deeper in design through construction that leads to extension of time and pushing out what we're delivering. Consideration of our open specifications enabling alternatives, so we're not too prescriptive, giving contractors the ability to come to the table and help us deliver what we need to by thinking out of the box. I think we need to keep that in mind. Really around collaboration is quite a big theme in what we need to be doing at the moment. There needs to be a bit of clear clarity on design packages. As I said, aim to limit multiple iterations back to that linear design process. Getting through a design, stopping, getting through an approval process, taking the next step. That doesn't work in the current market. Just looking forward, tender and procurement need to be flexible and agile. Clarity on responsibility, especially with an ECI, because like I said, it is, I think, important and necessary in this market, but it also understanding what that means for contractors and what they're actually delivering and bringing to the table. That's going to help a client deliver their project. Ordering later trades early in the construction, so it finishes. You might be wanting to deliver this in a couple, 2-3 years time, but it needs to be thought of up front. Goes right back to that shipping and the timeframes that we're seeing at the moment. Needs great commitment from clients to make these decisions early and stick with them in order to deliver. Otherwise, we get very prolongated projects, and that's no one's keen on that. And going back quite a long time, and considering what we used to do way back with scheduler quantities coming on board, so we're starting to see this again. It gives real clarity to contractors of what they're pricing, and it can be used, clearly used to see out any variations that might come out. But it also it just takes some of that risk away from them. It does move it on to a client. But if it is what's needed to deliver a project, then we're seeing that as a good tool in the tool belt to deliver these projects. And then just thinking about construction is clear understanding and agreement on program. Honest conversations with your contractor and between contractors and clients on delivering a program, what that means, who's doing what, when, and just nailing down and digging into it. Going through those with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that everyone's in agreement of what's going to be delivered when. Just reducing restrictions on site, trying to take away as many impediments from a contractor as possible. Makes their life easier, which will therefore make your life easier as well as clients. As commercial terms agreed early, get that out of the way, and lock that early with the contractor and between contractors and clients, so that we can really move forward in a collaborative approach. And the final one there, just note, was around communication and openness between contractors. This is where the relationship and trust helps to overcome any difficulties that we could see later on in a project. And I just sort of final slide come up there was just a bit of an idea on what a recent example of a recent project program and what we can see in there. And I don't know if I can really point to anything, but there is with these sort of projects and early procurement and getting stuff underway early, there is a need for potentially 10% of a construction costs expended through early works packages prior to any final tender being hit. This might be for the likes of lifts or facades or base isolation, even steel. Some of it may not be necessarily actually payments up front, but it's just a commitment that needs to be there quite early in a project, and even before detailed design is done, if we're going to hit timeframes. If we are sticking to a linear process, we're seeing up to a 9 to 12 month movement in that construction program, is we're needing the time that's needed to get shop drawings done, which counts as an error requiring PS1s and PS2s for the likes of facades and everything before they'll give building consent. So they need to be locked away early, which requires an early commitment to sub-trades and what we're actually doing before we even fully finish design. So it does really require a huge amount of trust and commitment between client and their consultants, and then through to the contractor. I mean, the traditional model can be followed. There's no reason why not. You can still do that. However, that will result in a big delay between tender award and then when construction commences. And I know that could be 9 to 12 months, with the need to get shop drawings, get PS1s and PS2s, the ordering of early materials, that they're when you want to start. And it's really pushed out those timeframes. So that's that's the end of my presentation. I believe, Julia, you're wrapping up any questions for the end of the whole session. Is that correct?
That's correct. And along with Helen, I have a question. How much is the time frame being pushed out for these projects?
Yeah, it's like I said, it is. We are seeing between 9 months and a year, and it can be more. It's just that need to get so much design done to get council and consenting done, or breaking up packages early, and then the need to get all this procurement. It's really is a big thing at the moment, getting goods to New Zealand, availability of goods, and then where to put them all, because you're getting them all so early. I mean, we're all hearing the likes of plasterboard unavailable, orders have all been cancelled, books wiped, starting again. Those sort of impacts are really quite front of mind at the moment. Having alternatives so you can just move from one to the next really does help a lot.
Thank you. Thanks, Regan. Welcome, Helen.
Yeah, apologies everybody. Technology failed me, so I'm very sorry about that. I'm Helen Womersley. I'm from the Ministry of Justice, and I was to be chairing today, but I see you've all got along fine without me, which is great. And thanks, Regan. I managed to catch your presentation, which was really good, very interesting. Yeah. So thank you. I think we've got time for a couple of questions before we move on to the next one. So if anybody has any more questions. I think maybe one for myself. I think with the availability of materials in particular, being very difficult at the moment. I don't know, Regan, if you have any thoughts on companies being able to set up new manufacturing plants to help with that backlog. I don't know if there's been any discussions in the industry about that.
Not huge that I'm aware of, but I mean, there's massive lead times in doing that, unfortunately, which in order to get that in place, which then once that's there, that projects that are in place now wouldn't see the benefits of that. It is a changing market, obviously, as you're aware. So I think the biggest thing is having alternatives, having your design teams and your consultants ready and already thinking about, okay, if this isn't going to be available, if this isn't going to be there, what's our alternative? What are we going to move to? And it requires a real agile. It is an agile space that we're working in at the moment.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Okay, well, if we move on to our next presentation, and if I can introduce Jo Carvey. Jo is the Senior Commercial Manager for Infrastructure and Procurement at the Ministry of Education.
Oh, sorry, Helen, we're going with Chris May first.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
That's okay.
Okay, so sorry about that. I will introduce Chris then. And sorry, just bear with me a second. Right. Yeah, so sorry everybody. Chris May, he's a I think we got this wrong on the agenda. It says transformational lead for MB, but actually, Chris, your title is somewhat different, isn't it? Can you just remind us what that is, please?
Yeah, sorry, it's construction procurement leader for the construction sector accord.
That's it. Great. Thank you very much. Over to you, Chris.
All good. Julie, are you able to chuck up the slides for my one? Technology has also failed me this morning. Sorry, everyone.
Yeah. One moment. I'll share your presentation.
All right. I'll just do the brief. Yeah. So as mentioned, good everyone. My name's Chris May from the Construction Sector Accord, which, if you don't know, is an accord between industry and government to try and tackle some of the broader system challenges across the construction and infrastructure sector. We run or support projects that cover a number of different areas, such as like business performance for SMEs and larger businesses, health and safety, workforce development, and procurement and risk. And yeah, so I was originally going to come today to speak about the broader outcome guidance, which is one of the products from the procurement and risk workstream, but happy to also share some detail after the presentation about broader outcomes in a hot market. I appreciate some of you will have heard about this guidance from other places. And so today, in addition to giving the general bit about what and why we're doing this, for those who haven't heard about it, I was also hoping to give a bit more detail about the guidance itself and give some suggestions about how to use the guidance. Yeah, so if that's all good, yeah, 1, summary of the guidance, 2, a bit of detail on the modules themselves, and 3, what to do to not lose sight in today's market. So you just go to the next slide, Julia. So what are broader outcomes? So for those who are unfamiliar, the easiest way that I think I can describe it is that broader outcomes refer to public value that the government wants to deliver alongside of its procurement spend. This could be procurement from anything from, any good or service, or up to like delivering schools or large infrastructure projects. It's essentially the peripheral or broader things that are achieved with the money in addition to the core thing that's being purchased. They're important to the construction sector accord, in particular because government makes up about 20% of the construction spend in the industry. And being public taxpayer money, it's important to make sure that that spend triggers positive outcomes for the wider industry. Like the spending of the money has to have a positive impact. It's also important for the construction sector because, as on screen, you can see the sector's got a lot of challenges or a lot of opportunities, depending on which way you look at it. The construction sector produces half of New Zealand's waste. Only about 18% of the construction workers are women. It's not on here, but I learned recently that statistically speaking, the construction sector loses a worker to suicide almost once a week. And in terms of workforce, we're short about 76,000 people. So broader outcomes is a procurement approach to try and address some of these challenges through good planning, good commercial conversations, and good contract delivery. It's easy to think of them as like additional requirements that you kind of work in afterwards, but really, in our view, in the Accord's view, it's about doing the same requirements in a way that influences good outcomes. Next slide, please, Julia. So yeah, with all the challenges I mentioned, what are the guidelines about? So yeah, working back a bit, Cabinet agreed 4 priority outcomes to ensure that there is focus across government agencies to try and tackle specific challenges. These priority outcomes were 1, including access for New Zealand businesses, including Māori and Pacifica and regional businesses. The second one's on improving worker conditions. The third is reducing emissions and waste. And the fourth is construction skills and training. And our hope is that this guidance will essentially increase the consistency of how government approaches broader outcomes in their construction projects. The guidance hopes to address some of the anecdotal barriers and hesitation that people have, as well as try to increase transparency on what government buyers are looking for. And most importantly, make progress by getting both clients and contractors all moving in the same direction. So earlier last year, we asked Hype PM Consultancy to develop the guidelines. and they worked with industry and government stakeholders to essentially develop these guidelines. We've tried to keep them so that they build off of existing policy documents. You don't need to go referring to too many different places, but then it also goes into the how layer so that government procurers can sort of get a guide on how to actually do it in their procurement process. Obviously, the approach is going to be different for projects that are in flight versus those that are, still in design or all the way in planning. The guidance is meant to help at all stages. And so, yeah, I really do encourage you to dive into the content. And in the background, the Accord's going to continue to provide support for the industry, as well as continue to keep the guidelines updated for whatever comes and any new ideas and approaches. Next slide, please, Julia. So that's the what and why. I'll dive now into the modules. So for those who haven't read it, module 1, it's broken up into 3 modules. The first module is about setting the right context and about aligning the industry's definition on what the outcomes are, and to help address issues where clients and contractors are communicating on different wavelengths. For clients, the first module has an overview of what broader outcomes or how broader outcomes can fit across a procurement process. Ideally, as a buyer, you would use this module to help your organization's understanding of what broader outcomes are, to help it grow, to also help get an idea of what government's expectations are around which of the outcomes are the key focus areas and what that means in practice, as well as get some insight into the impact and benefits that broader outcomes can achieve, if they are worked in. It also has a bit about at a high level, how to meaningfully engage with multi-providers. It has some key pillars that you can align your organization's strategy against, and includes descriptions and suggestions on how to contextualize the challenges that are in the guidance. For contractors, this module can help those who are unfamiliar with the term and how those expectations and requirements then translate to your business. So for those, who are looking to put themselves above others when tendering for government, even little things like being able to align the language of some of your own business's culture to that of the broader outcomes will help create common ground and bridge some of that, that organizational alignment awkwardness. And finally, it gives a heads up into the type of metrics and evidence clients might eventually start incorporating into their commercial decisions, and give an idea on what elements your business may have or not yet have the capacity to deliver to. Next slide, please, Julia. So modules 2 and 3 are more focused around how you do it. So module 2 in particular, for clients, it has a step-by-step process on how to ensure your project has considered where those opportunities are. And it also comes with some suggestions on how to communicate those opportunities throughout your procurement process. It includes advice around how to work it into your business cases and strategy. And it also has the opportunity map, which I'll talk about in a bit. It includes, the module 2 also includes guidance on actions during the tender phase, and then suggestions for contract KPIs. And then finally, in the appendix of that module, it's got a number of hyperlinks to organizations that are available to clients to help frame requirements and planning. So stuff like finding multi-providers, information about Green Star or ISCA, and health and safety and wellbeing partners like Mates in Construction, just to name a couple. For contractors, this second module builds on the first module, just gives a bit more insight into how these requirements might present themselves during procurement and tendering and contract delivery. You can use it to inform how you plan to answer these questions if you have the capacity to prepare for bids, but also how you might structure part of your business to meet a particular KPI that is important to government. The other big thing in module 2 is the opportunity map. For both clients and contractors, I think that this is a pretty relatively simple tool that's meant to help consider where across the project broader outcomes are available to achieve. For clients, our recommendation is to use this tool when planning your commercial case or when writing your commercial case. You would essentially, as part of developing your business case, you would set up a workshop with representatives from the sector, so that you might have like a contractor, may have like your design partners, and you would go through and unpack each phase of the project, each activity, and then working your way across all the different opportunities that are available. Like you would map it out on the spreadsheet. The opportunities, of course, need to be realistic in their achievability. However, the intention is by identifying them and then mapping where these opportunities exist at the business case stage, then makes it easier down the line to develop RFX and tender considerations and contract mechanics down the line, as well as, you know, making the broader outcomes closer to a critical deliverable through the business case, as opposed to like a last minute addition at the tender stage. We'd also recommend sharing similar documentation in advance of and then during tendering, so that companies looking to respond can also see where you believe the opportunities are, as well as come through with suggestions where they may have something that might have missed. Contractors or respondents to tenders can essentially use the opportunity map in reverse. You know, you look at the row that your business relates to and then work your way back on the opportunities that you can currently meet or could meet going forward. It's also a good way to see whether there are any gaps in what you would typically include as part of your bid responses. You know, like if there's a high opportunity on a particular column, then that's that's something that your business excels at. That's something to like hit hard on. Yeah, I think if there's you know, one key thing to take from this part of the presentation is that the opportunity map is super valuable when you start getting to use it as more part of your BAU process. Next slide, please, Julia. So the third module is just a much more detailed version of module 2. It has specific examples and considerations for each of the broader outcome priorities at the RFX question, evaluation, and KPI level. So for contractors, this is it in terms of what questions you may get asked, how it's likely the answers will be evaluated, like what clients will be looking for, and then what you may need to report on during your project. You know, you could look at these modules as like levels of detail, 1, 2, 3, or as a journey that the reader goes through as, you know, getting an idea about what this is all about, using the opportunity map to work through what's relevant, and then the specific questions and information you'd get out of a tender exercise. And yeah, that's kind of it. Sorry if I've raced through it, but that's the broader outcomes guidance. It's really meant to overlay on top of an existing process and shape the conversations, requirements, and outcomes from the project. Next slide, please, Julia. Oh, right, end slide. Well, I mean, yeah, so I mean, our hope is, or the Accord's hope is that if clients start to use this on a more regular basis, you know, work the examples and tools into their BAU approach to delivering projects. And if contractors are more familiar and more targeted in how these outcomes are achieved, that effectively a lot of the typical barriers to implementing broad outcomes is cut out of the system. That's probably it in terms of the end of my presentation, but I'm happy to also talk a bit about how you would incorporate this stuff in today's market, because there's a lot of, yeah, as Regan mentioned, there's a lot of challenges that this market's facing. I could probably speak more to the client rather than a contractor's view, but I think today's market really just highlights why guidance like this is important to get familiar with and to get started working, incorporating these approaches. That's not a barrier for tendering, that it's a core part of delivery and it doesn't get lost to cost pressures. And in a way that makes the job, you know, a really good opportunity to get involved with. Government is essentially saying you need to start incorporating these broader outcomes, but if you try and rush these requirements in isolation of the industry and good planning, you're going to end up going to market with a tender that's extremely aspirational, but also extremely prohibitive for respondents to try and meet. One point that I have is to make the broader outcome expectations clear and appropriate for the job. So for small projects, you know, just focusing your effort on an outcome that during procurement would translate to, you know, 1 or 2 particular requirements, that can go a long way to still achieving a positive effect, especially when, you know, purses are tight. When the market has more options for business, who are more and more aware about the time and costs spent on tendering. Broader outcomes expectations need to be very clear and very appropriately sized so people don't waste time on tendering for unrealistic things. Actually, I've got two more points. The second one's probably being consistent with your broader outcome strategy and starting your planning early. So kind of similar to what Regan was talking about earlier. You know, you can't just throw in requirements at the tender stage. It's better to come to the tender stage with a plan on how you're going to meet the outcomes. Like when responding to tenders, you know, Regan talked about earlier the supply chain challenges the sector's facing. In tendering and contracting, as a contractor, like if I try to put myself in their shoes, you look at any suggestion in a tender that says that there needs to be a guarantee that the price agreed on is going to be the price of the project's life. And that to me sounds like an obvious red flag. Like there's no way you can sign up to something when, you know, construction's good index goes up 3% a quarter or inflation's at 5.9. It's yes, there are cost mechanisms built into 3910 contracts, but you know, that same kind of market ambiguity applies to questions in proposals that are also equally ambiguous. So for example, a question that comes in through a tender that says, we want you to recycle 20% of all your waste materials on site. How do you propose to do that? Ideally, by following the guidance through and by planning from an early stage on how you're going to manage your waste, by the time you get to tender, you would have hopefully already considered where opportunities are to improve the whole project's waste profile. You know, you might have made decisions considering where opportunities are. Oh, so yeah, like, you know, during design, for example, you might use standard material dimensions to reduce offcuts and waste on site. You might have, you know, secured a commercial recycling company because you already know which materials can't be reused. You've spoken to a couple contractors on how to store material properly and most efficiently from like a logistics perspective to reduce truck movements. And then when you go to market, you're coming with a plan on how you're going to reduce your own waste through the project. And then the contractor then seeing if they can make it work. You know, it's alleviating ambiguous criteria through the tendering process. And my impression is that it screams of a client who has a well thought through plan and is maybe less of a risk of floundering if something goes wrong. My third and final point would probably be around budgeting for broader outcomes in the business case and having good forecasts for increased costs. Regan talked about, you know, contractors are facing significant challenges to their own businesses. Material delays mean projects take longer, which means reduced cash flow. When there's also more options for contractors to choose for, they have to be selective in the tenders that they participate in. And there's that pressure of funding and budgets is on both sides of the table. And things like reducing the cost of tendering, as well as providing insulation for any price or cost shocks that happen along the project, can do a lot to boost the attractiveness of your opportunity. But if it's mismanaged, I think there's a real risk of seeing broader outcomes requirements as just more risk and more requirements being pushed onto contractors. If you have a budgeted line item, for example, for broader outcomes as part of the business case, and you make it a critical component for the investment's delivery, and then you incorporate those into forecasting to help prepare both the client and the contractor, to help reduce the price shocks down the road. That's an extremely helpful position to be for a contractor. And if you can imagine, the Accord shared some guidance earlier on around managing COVID risk. It's essentially trying to take that approach, but doing it from a budgeting perspective, making sure that there's enough insulation to manage any shocks. Yeah, like I know it's easier said than done, obviously, but the current market is in a way a perfect storm, and there's never been a more needed time for good planning, good accessible tendering, and good commercial relationships. So yeah, if there's anything to lead off, I think it's make the requirements clear and appropriate, start planning delivery early, and include it in budgets from the beginning. And that's it for me. I'll hand over back to Helen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Yeah, that was a really interesting presentation there. Some eye-popping statistics and yeah, some real challenges that face us. And yeah, thank you for bringing some more clarity to us about the broader outcomes. That was really good. That was really helpful. I'll just open the floor up now to any questions. We will have an opportunity again at the end.
Yeah.
For more questions.
If anybody
if we
wants to
don't-
ask a question, can you please type it in the chat message? We also do have a question that Todd Frank raised during, I think it was Regan's presentation. So do you have an early engagement step before ECI step, as main contractors may have their pre-construction teams books 3 odd months in advance?
So yeah, I can answer that. Look, no, look, I don't have a specific step in mind in regards to that. It's those open communications. It's just starting that communication line, getting those with potential contractors, whoever you may have on your books that you think you might like to work with. I'd suggest this. I don't have a specific step prior to that. Todd. Thanks, Judy.
Problem. Any other questions from anybody? Okay, Todd's given a thumbs up. And we have a question from Blair. What incentives do you think could be put in place to get contractors and clients committed to broader outcomes?
I'm assuming, Blair, if you're meaning like internal to an organization, or do you mean sort of government-wide imposed incentive? I think the broader outcomes one is one that's sort of starting off as, so that's through one of the cabinet mandates around procurement practice, is that they need to consider them. So from a public sector perspective, it's an expectation from cabinet that they need to start incorporating this stuff. And the idea being is that that will then trickle through to projects. I think internally to an organization, I think back to an example I had from another procurement colleague, which was quite a strong argument for pushing for these broader outcomes is the cost of not doing the broader outcome. And so as opposed to thinking about sort of what's the cost implication of undertaking, like, you know, different parts of meeting it, it's what's the cost to the business or cost to the organization about not approaching it. You know, what does it do in terms of the organization standing in the market, like how attractive they are to work with? What does it do in relation to the broader picture about addressing some of the issues around, you know, like addressing issues like climate change, the inaction of addressing broader outcomes, or like the issue of the lack of people inside of the workforce. It's the cost of the inaction being the driver for then action, and that from a client's perspective, that's a really strong motivator for executive teams. Is like, you know, it's the consequence, and making that consequence apparent, but then also coming with the plan helps organizations really buy into getting on board with delivering broader outcomes. I'm not sure if that's really answered in terms of the contractor's perspective, but hopefully that helps for clients.
Blair did sort of say it was either when you asked the question about if it was internal. He said either for the incentives. Yeah.
And so I think that the first answer I had around, so the not internal, but more the broader system. I mean, in addition to stuff that comes in addition to the procurement mandate, you know, we are seeing changes in the construction sector on how it's framed from a regulatory perspective. You know, there's stuff like Building for Climate Change that's coming out, which is the update to the building code that starts requesting builds to start accounting for their carbon emission profile. More and more we'll start to see these kind of practices come in. I'm sure we'll start to see these practices come in as to try and sort of encourage the market to move into a more responsible and more accountable position. And so really, actually, the edge at the moment is to get familiar with that stuff now so that you can put yourself out there and be a leader and be the go-to, the experts for other to follow. That's, I think, so in short, it's the incentives are working their way through the system and coming in different places. And so that's why, you know, getting familiar with the guidance is a really good move.
Do we have any more questions? I'm giving it a bit longer for everybody because I know it takes time to type. It does to raise your hand.
Well, I'm Julie or Helen, I'm sure afterwards, in addition to sharing presentations, we'd also share emails and stuff. I'm sure, more than happy if you don't have any questions this time around, you can always follow up with myself or the rest of the team. I think my emails or one of the contacts is on one of the presentations. So, yeah. That's
great. Thank you, Chris. Okay, so we'll move on to our next presentation now then, which is, and I'll get it right this time, Jo Carvey, who is a Senior Commercial Manager for Infrastructure Procurement at the Ministry of Education. So I'll hand over to you now, Jo, please.
Hi, how you doing? Can I, do I just need to take control to share my presentation?
You should be able to. I've just stopped presenting, so you should be able to present yours. And if not, let me know and I will share your presentation.
Hopeless at multitasking, so bear with me. Can you see what I've got on there?
We can. Do you want to put it in presentation mode?
Yeah, no problem. Just do that. Okay, so I'm going to talk about, thank you for the introduction. So I head up the commercial team that sits in the infrastructure procurement team within Ministry of Education. So this probably follows on quite sequentially from the other two presentations. So what I'm going to cover off today is just some of the stuff that we've been doing in this space to react to the current market. So some of the activities that we've been up to. So I'll start, and it's a slightly random combination, but I was originally asked to come and talk about off-site manufacturing. So I'll talk about that bit first, which is one of the responses, and then I'll just go through to some of the other activities that we've been doing. So one of the things that has really grown and expanded for the Ministry of Education over the last probably to scale in the last 2-3 years has been the off-site manufacturing space. We have had real success in delivering much quicker, the same quality product, but with minimal disruption to schools. As you can imagine, having building sites and school kids is not the best combination. So as much as you can avoid that, the better. And this is probably now about 10% of our work is actually buildings that are produced off-site and delivered onto site. So just got a sort of one-page infographic here you can all read, so I'm not going to do death by PowerPoint, but some of the key takeaways I think from our perspective is just to give you a scale of size. We did 224 teaching spaces last year through this approach. We can turn these over reasonably quickly, significantly faster than our traditional build construction. We're also looking at a redesign process at the moment just to sort of enhance what we're currently doing and improve on it. And how we procure these, and that's one of the things that is around the pace, is that we have a framework agreement that we can call off, which really speeds up the procurement and just means that these can get to site really quickly. So you've got the numbers, you've got the pictures here, so I won't go on, but I'm happy to cover off any questions about it. But it has really enabled us to respond quicker in a really challenging market. I'm going to cover now is probably some of the other things that we're doing in this space, which is just how we're doing things differently and how we've kind of evolved as a ministry over the last few years. And one of the things I'm really passionate and focused about, and the team in the ministry is actually being able to share learnings and best practice and what's working well for you and what's working well for us. So feedback is really welcomed. So one of the things that we do is we have commercial managers over our large strategic contracts, and we're continually expanding on this. What that means is that we have a point of contact nationally. So a lot of our arrangements are national. And rather than looking at a project by project level, which is critical, and delivery is focused on getting things done, we also have that commercial management, which gives us that ability to have those strategic discussions at the right level and get things done, so delivery can be focused on for actually getting schools built. I'm sure you're all very familiar with 3910. We continue to commit to improving on the 3910 and have made some really great strides to make it a much fairer and even contract. Supplier engagement, so a lot of work around different tools in tiering and reporting, which I'll cover off a bit more in a couple of slides. Financial due diligence, so one of the things that we do, and I think we all know that it's very uncertain times right now, is making sure that we don't we're in a space where we're issuing work at the right level to suppliers, and we're balancing and managing our risk. Another thing we're doing is performance management. So we're now probably about 18 months, 2 years into this. We've got really good performance data that allows us to be able to make good decisions on who we work with and how we work with them. What's really important about this, and I think what I'd like to emphasize, is this is a good opportunity to have two-way conversations with suppliers. And there's always, when there's a perception that things aren't necessarily working, there's always two sides to a story, and there's always a conversation to be had. And one of the real values of this has been that. We've also got our approach to COVID claims, which I know has been adopted more broadly, and I'll just run through a few bits on that on another slide. And another thing that we're doing a lot more closely is sector partnering. So to Regan's point earlier around early engagement with the sector, actually talking more at program level rather than project by project level. That's a sort of evolution that we're working towards, and we're making some really good strides on that in some of our spaces. So these are just a few images. This is an oldie. We've probably got about 650 reviews now, but this is the sort of output of how we measure our performance. We measure it across all different service types. So engineering, QSs, main contractors. There's a simple survey style that sits behind this with a sort of quality assurance process and things that my team look after. And basically what this allows us to do, and this is on Power BI, so you can filter and change and edit things, but it allows us to gain some really good insights around what who we're working with, who's performing, how things are going, and it really just quantifies some of those generally anecdotal discussions about performance that we've dealt with in the past. The other one that I'll cover is the MOE COVID response. So these are just some of the things that we've been doing and looking at. So reactively, we've got a COVID support framework. So there is a team in place that supports with claims. Proactively, we've introduced a tag into our contracts that addresses this. And future focused, obviously, we're really hoping there's a life after COVID and what that means and how that changes. So these are just some of the things that we're looking at. I think, the stats, and these allude to what Regan's talked about before, and we all know, but construction in our space has gone up 12.63% and 8.75% increase in the past 19 months over COVID. So these are just, the big numbers, and we need to we need to try and control something that's really out of our control as much as possible. So that's some of the work that we're doing in that space. I know there's some people from the sector here, but the responses and the feedback that we have had on this has been really, really positive about our approach to this. And we continue to have a team that work with suppliers on this. The other thing I'll talk to is the sector partnering. So this is, you know, we've generally in the past, we've been very transactional around how we work with projects, and we are working much more closely on trying to see the bigger picture. You know, there's regions, there's bundles, there's ways of working which are going to make opportunities more attractive for the sector. You know, if a small isolated project in itself may not necessarily be appealing, but if it's part of a larger program of work, it certainly means that we can get the right suppliers doing the right type of work. We get a lot of feedback around, you know, certainty and visibility and pipeline opportunities, and that's something we're really striving to improve on. Managing those strategic relationships with our suppliers is continues to be a real focus for us, and we've recently yet to start got a commercial manager coming on board who is going to work with our top spend construction suppliers. The key focus for that is to work recognising there are lots of regional differences and there's amazing work that's already underway, but actually sort of tying that together and supporting that role. Standardising our procurement processes is a key one for us, as well as sort of incentivising future opportunity through, you know, good performance. If you perform well, there are more opportunities, and that's going to be key to this. So and I'll talk a little bit more about how our commercial management structure works. So as I say, I think this will continue to evolve and grow, and it has done over the last few years, but it's really about having better relationships with our suppliers and having those conversations at the right level, addressing problems and issues up front, being really transparent, and truly having a partnership approach with the sector. We all want the same outcomes, and we're all in it for the same reasons. So actually having those really open conversations is just key. But very much recognising the regional elements and the regional differences, because that's another thing that, you know, just some central Wellington person trying to direct things all over the country is just not appropriate. Not, you know, so it's recognising the regional differences, making sure that we've got the right information, such as good performance data, good financial due diligence data, good insights into previous projects that allows us to feed into decision making when we're looking for the right people going forward. And just really understanding the businesses, understanding what their drivers are, what they need, what their expectations are, so everyone's on the same page and not just assuming. So that's really sort of fundamentally what our commercial management model's about. So what's next? So we, as I've said, we're continuing to grow, we're continuing to strive for more and better. Really is about partnering with the sector. I think we don't know what's ahead, and the only way of getting through that is to have a true partnership approach. So more insight, more data and trends, so we really understand how the market performs. We have some information, but I think we're relatively immature in that space. We're also doing a lot of work with other agencies and MB, and trying to share, you know, best practice and what we've learned and what we can learn from other people. You know, there's no point reinventing the wheel. If something's done well somewhere else, then let's look at it, let's use it. And really just looking for beyond procurement to a true end-to-end approach. And I think that's really important, is actually procuring stuff is just one part of, you know, relationship management and working with the sector. We want long-term enduring relationships, and I think in order to do that, we need to partner with the sector. One other thing that we have really nearly got to is internal and external dashboards. So just talking to data, we've got information in various places. Contracts are in one place, data around performance is somewhere else, project timelines and progress is somewhere else. So what we've actually, what we have under development at the moment, which is very nearly done, is some internal and external dashboards that provide a sort of one-stop picture of where our supplies are at. So the internal dashboard really looks at trends in the sectors and in the different service types and delivery types, and what's working and what's not, and what we need to focus on. And when we look at our external view, it's looking at really, so we can have really good conversations with suppliers and work with them and show them from a working with the ministry perspective what they, where they're at, how they're performing, what's coming up in the pipeline, what level of what opportunities have they had in the past, what opportunities are coming up that they may want to look at. So just really building that better relationship management with our suppliers. So that's me, short and sweet. So any questions?
Okay, just while people are typing away, thank you, Jo. That's a very informative presentation. Some really interesting figures there as a result of COVID. So thank you for sharing those with us. I think we've seen the sort of same reflecting in other government agencies as well. So yeah, open the floor up to questions.
Fine, I'm sure I covered everything.
Okay. So Julia, the presentation has been recorded, so people can go back and review at any time. I think we share the presentations as well. So if anybody wants to be reminded of what we've just spoken about, that's really useful.
Yeah, we do have one question that's come in from Ursula. Do we have any performance guidelines online?
So we have external guidelines, and really happy to share any information like that. We've provided information to other agencies that have used what we've produced as a bit of a template for how they've taken some stuff. So I'm happy to share the link to the website. But if you want a direct conversation, Ursula, just connect in.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
I just have one question, if you don't mind, Jo. Just when you're talking about your offsite manufacturing for your schools, how do you deal with quality? How do you ensure quality?
So a number of ways. So we have one of the things that our team, that Ministry of Education have, is construction observers. And as part of their role, they will go both on site and into the factories to ensure that the quality is fit for purpose. It's also a commercially managed programme, so it's managed really tightly. There's monthly governance meetings and lots of discussion around quality and performance as part of those.
Okay, I think we're good for questions now, unless any are coming through at the last minute. If they are, I just want to take
any.
yeah.
Oh no, I spoke too soon.
Okay.
For Chris May from Marlow, is there any way that a company can score themselves on how well they achieve the broader outcomes guidance, much like how Streetwise scores companies on their health and safety?
Not from like a PAM project perspective. You know, Sitewise is like it's independently assessed, right? Whereas I think the broader outcomes is still in its infancy in terms of like having a consistent rubric or standardized rubric across the sector. But that being said, I think it is something worth, if there are any government procurement colleagues on the call, something worth considering, because I think something like that would be extremely useful. To start off with, I would say the opportunity map and the examples in there. I mean, I get that the way in which they're measured wouldn't be consistently applied, but even just having an idea on the types of measurements or like the types of requirements that you would then do to then meet the standard can help at least lay some groundwork. But I'm happy to take that and actually go back, because I think that is a good point around a standardized rubric. And it probably actually just to build on that, I mean, granted, for some categories there are other systems out there, right? Like, so there's Green Star and the ISCA one for environmental sustainability, this Sitewise, as you mentioned. I think it's more just about maybe one that kind of collates it all from a high level, that has like at a super high level, how organizations, contractors, subbies, designers, and even government entities, how they match up in terms of meeting broader outcomes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Any more questions? Or while we wait for any more questions to come through, Julia, do you want to talk about what's next on the Wellington agenda?
Unfortunately, I don't have it to hand, but yeah, otherwise I would. But all the events will be advertised to everybody coming up, and yeah, watch the space. We do have another question, Blair. Oh yeah, so you've answered the question from Blair. I think it's important, as you are asking for investment, so there needs to be transparency on the measures. Yeah, okay, that's great, thank you. Sorry, Helen. Yeah, no, I will be sharing all the events coming up. Yeah. I don't have anything else to add at this stage.
Good. Okay. Again, if we wait for any more questions, please send them through. But I just want to thank everybody for their time today, for all of the attendees and also all of our speakers as well. We're in very busy and interesting times at the moment, so I know I speak for everybody when we say thank you very much for giving up your time and sharing your skills and your knowledge and experience with us all today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. You have almost 14 minutes back of your time.
Yeah, which we all need. I know we all need.
Yeah.
Thanks, Helen.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for attending. Goodbye.